Welcome, everybody. We are going to get started, and it is time. It is already time to start the webinar, so thank you all for being here. Welcome to the SCORE Plus Teach Science of Comprehension for Reading Excellence, plus Taking Evidence, Applying to Classroom Habits. This webinar, we are starting off a new webinar series where we are going to break down topics on reading comprehension, and then we will connect to LETRS, everything that all of you have learned in LETRS, and apply to classroom practice. So we appreciate all of you being here with us today. In today's session, our very first, we are going to break down Dr. Kelly Cartwright's webinar on the science of reading comprehension, or why word reading is not enough. This session was attended by many of your school administrators a few weeks ago, and we are very pleased to offer you the same content and really focus more on our North Carolina educators. But before we start, I'd like to get our introductions with who we have here. Our dedicated team from the Mebane Early Literacy Center, we have Dr. Miranda Fitzgerald. She's an associate professor in reading in elementary. We have Jennifer Mary. She's our admin support associate and doctoral candidate. And then we also have Shannon Pardue, who is a graduate assistant and doctoral candidate. And they're going to help us out with some of the chat. The chat should be able to come in right to the panelists, and also with some back-end issues and taking out AI bots as they come into the chat. So we have a few tidbits so that we can get these 90 minutes moving. We have muted all of the participants just because we do expect many people, and that will help with the audio. We would ask that you use the chat for any questions that you have to the panelists. And then we also have a reflections and notes page that has already been dropped in the chat box. We'll drop it in a few times over the next few minutes because we have so much content to go through. We've already started and it's only been 2 minutes. I wanted to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded. So we will be able to have a video and then we will email that to you all after you've attended. And it'll be connected to our YouTube page so you can come back to it at any time. And we will be removing any AI bots. This will just help keep our chat nice and professional as we go forward. All right, so welcome. We are going to start with our agenda and let you know that you will all become Mythbusters around the science of reading. We're going to have our brief introductions and then talk through myths 1 through 3 quickly, and then we'll go deeper into myths 4 and 5. And then we'll spend the second half of our webinar on applications for the classroom and what this means for you as an educator. So let's start off by finding out who we have here today. And we are going to share a poll. So let's see. We'll pull this up, launch the poll. And I'd love to know a little bit about who is here today. So in the poll, go ahead and share your role, where you're located. You can actually write your district name and your state in the poll. And then also, we would like to know which grade levels you support. So feel free to click as many grade levels as you support, or just one if you're in a general classroom teacher. And then we, again, will throw that handout that we have for reflections in the chat as we go. And as you're doing that, I'll share a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Angela Preston. I am the director of the Mebane Early Literacy Center here at UNC Charlotte. And prior to joining higher education, I was a special education teacher in North Carolina. And I'm going to turn it over to the queen of classroom instruction, Mary Durfel.
Thank you, Angela. My name is Mary Durfel, definitely not the Queen of Instruction, but I do love it. And I'm the Assistant Director of Early Literacy in the Office of Early Learning at the Department of Public Instruction. So I'm really happy to be here day and with my favorite group of individuals, which are teachers. I was a teacher for the majority of my career in the general education classroom. Then I was an instructional coach, and then I came to work at the department in 2020, and I've been here ever since working on literacy. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'm going to hand it over to Angela, and I'll talk with you guys later at the end, closer to the end of our webinar.
Thanks, Mary. So we have about 80%. It looks like most of you have filled out the poll so far. And I'm going to give you a quick rundown so I can give a few more people a chance to answer. But it looks like we have mostly teachers and coaches in the room with us today. So that is really exciting. We have a few ELSs, and then some state and district community members, coaches here. And then we have a really nice bell curve with the grade levels so kindergarten, first, second, third, all the way down to fourth and fifth. So mostly third grade teachers at 69%, and then 60% second grade and fourth grade. So I'm going to end the poll. Looks like most people have seen this. Share the results real quick so you can all see who is here with us today. Well, this is exciting. I'm so glad to have so many educators in the room with us, and to really be able to focus on reading comprehension and really what we're trying to do for literacy. Okay, so once again, thank you for being here with us today. We wanted to start with kind of the big picture and the purpose of our webinar series. I know that all of our educators come into North Carolina having very valuable teaching experience. So each of you have the experience that shaped you as a teacher and who you are right now. And then over the last few years, we've gone through the LETRS training. So many of you completed LETRS training, and some of you might be doing it right now if you're new to the state. On top of that, we also know that research continues to move forward. So there's new research that we have around how kids learn to read and how the brain learns to read. And so as a teacher and an educator in literacy specifically, we're always looking at how do we increase our ability and talents and skills to be able to be a really strong reading teacher. So our Mebane Early Literacy Center, we're here at UNC Charlotte. We were thinking about how could we actually support all of this whole process. We know you have the teaching experience. You've gone through LETRS training. There's new knowledge and research on how we teach kids to read and how do we really support classroom practice. And we had this discussion about let's hold a webinar series for school administrators. And when we polled many of your school administrators, they were saying they really wanted something on reading comprehension. So we started the Science of Comprehension for Reading Excellence. That's our SCORE webinar series. And we're focusing on supporting our school administrators, the district ELS roles, and coaches that are either in your school or at the district level. But we thought we need to do more than that. We're a center in North Carolina supporting the whole state, and we have other organizations that are doing incredible things for reading, and one of them being the Office of Early Learning and all the work that they've done to help support reading and literacy across the state. So Mary Durfel and I partnered to put together SCORE Plus Teach. And this is where we're focusing on our educators. So we're taking the content that your school administrators had in the SCORE webinar session with the expert on reading comprehension. And then we're going to take that information and break it down. We're going to connect it to LETRS, what you've learned in LETRS, and then we're also going to connect it to what you can do in your classroom and how to apply all of this together. So the goal here is that more and more kids are learning to read. You're feeling even more strong and confident in your role as an educator in teaching literacy. So we're going to set the stage by letting Dr. Kelly Cartwright welcome all of you and describe and celebrate all the work that's been happening so far. So for those of you who are joining us now or joined us in the last few minutes, this is the webinar that she provided to your school administrators, and we're going to take some of the clips of what she shared and we're going to talk through them throughout today's session.
I want to celebrate all the amazing hard work that you've been doing across the state of North Carolina, starting with the passage of the Excellent Public Schools Act and then the years of hard work on letters training. I know educators have done 2 long, rigorous years of letters training, and that hard work has really paid off. This headline from August of 2024 says that once again, our kids, our babies in North Carolina are outperforming kids across the country on those DIBELS assessments. And that's just phenomenal. So you need to pat yourselves on the back because the hard work is providing results, just like we'd hoped. And then we see headlines like this one that came out at the beginning of this month that again highlight those glows where we see those continued gains on DIBELS scores in first and second grade in particular, and a surprising mismatch with our third grade EOGs. And that's caused some educators and some legislators to ask, why? Why is this happening? Why are we seeing this weird split between the progress monitoring gains and the third grade EOGs? We thought they would go in line with one another. And so that mismatch is why we're here together today, because we still have work to do. And before we dig into answering that why question, I want to talk about our assessments in North Carolina. So, DIBELS that you use all the time to progress monitor at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, it assesses primarily components of word recognition and fluent word reading. We have the Maze for comprehension and vocabulary, but not all students get those. And the bulk of the assessments we're giving focus on fluent word recognition, right? And then the third grade EOGs focus primarily on reading comprehension and vocabulary. So they, of course, require that you read words, but they're not assessing your word reading in the same way. So looking at that weird split that one article pointed out between DIBELS scores and EOG scores, that's led some educators to ask, well, maybe that the science of reading is just not working and we should scrap it and go back to what we were doing before. And I want to take a quick look at our implementation timeline to think about how we answer that question. Did the science of reading not work? Well, I colored the descriptions of the assessments. We'll go back to those. DIBELS is blue, EOGs are green. And you can look at the implementation of LETRS. Our educators in North Carolina did LETRS Volume 1, which focuses on word recognition and fluent word reading, first. And then a year later, the implementation of the green things happened, comprehension and vocabulary. And we're actually still in the process of implementing comprehension and vocabulary and making those critical shifts in instruction. And this 24-25 school year is where that article got those data. Okay. So educators' number one support request that we see across the state when the people at Mebane Early Literacy Center are talking to educators, when in my work with the distinguished professors around the state, as I talk with educators in my everyday work, every time we talk with them, we're hearing that I've got word recognition down pat. I know how to do that, but I really think we need support with vocabulary and comprehension, especially comprehension. It's tough to teach. That's why we're here. So if we think about the answer to the question, did the science of reading not work? My resounding answer here would be, of course it's working. It's in progress. We need to continue our forward motion. We're not done. You can't implement everything in 1 year or a couple of years and expect it to magically work. We are in the process and we're still shifting in the green stuff.
All right, so we are going to start Mythbusters. We're going to deepen our knowledge of reading comprehension instruction, and we're going to continue to grow in our knowledge of the science of reading and how we can support students. So we're going to breeze through these first 3 myths. Because I'm pretty sure that all of you already know these and could answer them, but it's always important to verify that what we know is aligned with the science of reading. So let's start with our first myth. The science of reading is word recognition, phonics, and fluency only. Well, we know that the science of reading really is a body of research, It's all about how our brains learn to read. And the Reading League has a very thorough and widely accepted definition of the science of reading. And we have a link to that definition being sent in the chat if you want to check that out yourself. But really, the science of reading is a wide body of research all about the different aspects on how our brains learn to read. And it's not just a recent thing, but something that has been going on for decades to really help us coordinate what we know is the most impactful ways to teach kids to read, and then ways that are more harmful and things that aren't going to have the results we're looking for. But if we take a step further and go to LETRS and see what LETRS says, and we can see that you've already gone through that. You already have gone through volume 1, where we've gone through word recognition and all of those different units on how we read words. But then you've also gone through volume 2, which was all about language comprehension. And those are the 2 different pieces that we know together make up the science of reading, along with many other areas that support how our brains learn to read. So it's not just word recognition and fluency. So let's look at myth number 2, which is reading comprehension will naturally follow if fluent word recognition is in place. Well, what does LETRS say about this one? In unit 6 and 4, the foundational skills and fluency are necessary, but they're not sufficient for word reading for comprehension. And comprehension of spoken and written language, it has to happen as well. So we're not just saying that once we can read the words, we will automatically be able to comprehend what we've read. We know that foundational skills, that we have to have word recognition and we have to have fluency, but neither of those are going to be sufficient on their own in order for our students to just then comprehend. So we can wait for this comprehension fairy to come and magically make our students comprehend what they've read, but that's not going to happen on its own. So in other words, some students are going to read fluently, but they're not going to recall what it was that they read. Word reading fluency is necessary for comprehension, but it's not enough on their own. Actual comprehension is more than just being fluent, and we're going to talk a lot more about this today. So let's look at what this might seem like in our classroom if we look at some DIBELS data. You should all have access to either the thumbs up or reactions as a participant in your Zoom. So I want you to use the reactions, give me some thumbs up, and show me if you have ever had a student who has been able to read the words, and then when we go to ask them what happened, they can't actually tell you. They do not know what they just read. They are unsure what the story was actually about. Has anybody had any students like that? Yeah. Oh, look, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up, some comments in the chat, yeses, hands raised. Yes. We've all seen this, right? We're teachers. We've seen the kids who are able to read the words, they're fluent in their reading, but they're not comprehending. So we can't say for those students specifically that it's because they're not decoding. Is that the case for some students? Absolutely, but not every student. So we need to be digging a little bit further as to, well, why? Why might this be happening? So let's look at a couple students where we can think about what this would look like. So if we look at Andrew and Sarah, I've highlighted those 2 students. Andrew and Sarah, they both have those word recognition skills down, but you can see in the maze, that's where things are falling apart for them. And then look at Sarah. She's great on word reading fluency, nonsense word fluency, or reading fluency even, but the maze is not at the goal. It's well below benchmark. So something's really not hitting for Sarah when she's doing her reading. And if you have a student that's like this, I want you to keep that student in your mind as we go through some of these other things today. Okay, so I told you we're going through these first couple myths pretty quickly. So we're already to myth 3. Teach learning to read, then reading to learn. All right, this is a really common misconception. Again, I want you to give me a thumbs up or raise your hand if you've ever heard anybody say, well, we teach kids how to read before third grade, and then after third grade, we teach kids to learn to read or to read to learn. I said that backwards. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, this is the one that we need to talk through a little bit more because are we actually doing that? If we go all the way down to preschool, what's happening and how are kids actually learning before they learn to read? Well, your preschool teacher friends had to complete letters for early childhood. And if you look at unit number 2, they went through oral language connections. It's all about oral language. So we think about, well, how do younger kids actually learn things before they know how to read? It's through their language comprehension. A 4-year-old is going to learn about sharks when a family member reads them a book about sharks. Our minds learn many, many things before we actually learn to read. So we want to think about revising this phrase, and instead we want to think, teach listening to learn and learning to read. Let's do that first. Then, once our students can independently read, then they can read to learn. Knowledge is going to be built through the oral language before they're learning through the text that they're reading. So we need to make sure that we're thinking that way and that we're giving it a very specific place in the early grades. So what do we mean by that? It means that we cannot teach decoding skills at the expense of language comprehension. We can't just say, all we're going to do in these early grades is focus on teaching kids how to read, word recognition skills. It's always both. It's always both. So how do we ensure that it's always both? And what do myth 1 through 3 actually have in common? Well, it's our daily schedule. Your daily schedule should have a specific time for word recognition and language comprehension and writing. That's also a really important piece. In kindergarten, you're focusing a little more than half of your time is going to be focused on those word recognition skills. So print concepts, phonological awareness, your basic phonics, you're making those sound letter associations. All of that's happening in the earlier grades. And then by third grade, you're still teaching advanced decoding and morphology. You're still focusing on the word recognition, but that's going to be less than half. So now you're going to have a little more than half of your time spent in the language comprehension side. So it's always both. We're never just going to do one or the other. We're going to always have both of these happening. And the best way for us to ensure that as teachers is to just make sure that we have that time focused in our schedule where we can be teaching both of those skills. All right, so let's jump over to myth 4A, which is comprehension is an outcome. This is a very short video, and let's hear what Dr. Cartwright says about this.
And this brings us to our 4th myth, 4A, reading comprehension is an outcome. We often, and legislators often, talk about reading comprehension as an outcome. It's the thing we're going for. It's why we're teaching all the other stuff so that they can then comprehend. But really and truly, it's a multifaceted process of structure building that we also have to teach explicitly. The outcome's not going to happen if they don't get instruction in the process.
Okay, so I want all of you to say this with me. I can't see you. I know you're in the room with me. I want everybody to say this. The outcome is not going to happen if they don't get instruction in the process. We aren't going to see this amazing outcome of comprehension unless we teach them how to comprehend, unless we teach them the process of how our mind makes meaning from what we're reading. This is a really important piece that I hope we take away from today. So now we're going to talk about, well, what does this mean to actually provide instruction on the process of comprehension?
4B that we hope to dispel today is that you teach it by asking questions. Now, good questioning is an important instructional practice to know about, but that's not what I'm talking about here. There has been research since the 1970s when Dolores Durkin went into elementary classrooms to look at comprehension instruction. She was curious, do people teach kids how to comprehend or what? What are they doing? And the most common instructional move in 1978 was asking comprehension questions, assessing, which isn't really fair if you think about it. If I don't tell someone how to do something and then I test them on it, it's not good educational practice. The same way that if my goal is to put together a car engine and a mechanic comes in and just starts asking me questions about the car engine, I'm not going to have any idea how to do that. The mechanic has to teach me the sub processes for putting it together before I can create that coherent whole. The same way that we educators need to provide our students with the sub processes of comprehension so they can make that coherent whole in their heads. 20 years later, Michael Presley observed the same thing. 20 years-ish after that, maybe not quite 20, Molly Ness observed the same thing. And this year, Phil Capon observed yet again the same thing. The most common instructional move that we make when we're teaching comprehension is to ask questions rather than teach kids specific processes to help them understand how to comprehend texts. And I have a link to a great little piece, I think it's an Ed Week piece, about this article and his research findings here. And so what that shows is that we as a nation have more to learn about how we can best teach comprehension to help kids to engage in that process in deliberate, intentional, active ways. And
So, when we think about how we are teaching comprehension, is it just that we're asking questions? Is that how we teach comprehension? If we focus on teaching comprehension through questions, we're still considering comprehension as a product, but we know that comprehension is actually a process. And you learned about that when you went through LETRS. The definitions that they went through at the very beginning of Unit 6 were all about how comprehension really is a process. It's not a product in how we are showing an outcome of something that we've comprehended. So instead of focusing on comprehension products like answering questions, we really want to teach the process of comprehension. We actually get to show students how we think about things as we comprehend. We're going to talk a bit more about that as we go forward. That is one of the exciting things about being a teacher, is being able to show people how you think about something. So let's go back to our class of students. Some of our students are right on track with word reading and decoding, and some are struggling with both. But we've got Andrew and Sarah, where we know that the decoding and word reading, that's not the issue. Something's happening with them within their comprehension. So we want to be thinking about what's going on here. Our next section is going to go deeper into why your students might be able to read these words, but then not actually be able to comprehend. So I want you to keep your student, or if you don't have one like this, keep Andrew and Sarah in mind as we start to reframe how we think about comprehension.
this also helps to highlight the idea that the way that we conceptualize reading, it shapes our instruction and it shapes our students' outcomes. And so I want to talk about some of the ways that we conceptualize reading. And I know that you know this one, the simple view of reading from back in 1986, where decoding or word recognition and language comprehension are essential to make reading comprehension happen. And this model leads us to ask some important instructional questions like, do my students have all the word recognition skills they need? Do they have all the language comprehension skills they need? And those are important questions because we need all that stuff to be able to comprehend a text. This model tends to lead us to think about instruction as making sure that we fill students up with enough decoding or word recognition skill, enough language comprehension skill, and we assume that if we do that, that reading comprehension will naturally follow. And as we have seen in our own data from the article I shared earlier, and in research data, that isn't always the case. And The other model that you may be really familiar with is Scarborough's reading rope, which is a wonderful expansion of the simple view. And the reason that Hollis Scarborough put together her rope was to provide practice implications for teachers. She wanted us to understand how to unpack language comprehension and word recognition with all of these subcomponents within each area of skills. And this model, again, leads us to ask these same important questions about our students. Do they have the word recognition and language comprehension skills they need? But it also adds a really important extra feature, and that's that skilled reading involves combining these. It involves putting them together. It involves braiding them together and integrating them, because skilled readers integrate these seamlessly, but it doesn't tell us how. It's as though that braiding part, highlighted as important, is not explained fully. And we don't know how readers learn to integrate these. The rope doesn't say. And this model, again, leads us to think about making sure that they have all the word recognition skills they need, they have all the language comprehension skills they need, and we hope that reading comprehension will follow. But for kids like Andrew and Sarah, what research is showing is that these two-factor models don't fully explain reading comprehension for these students. They explain about half of reading comprehension. So you can see if we were to fill up this oval with the variables that predict their reading comprehension, word recognition and language comprehension account for about half of Andrew and Sarah's reading comprehension. And that leads us to ask, just like we did with the iceberg image, what's missing? What's not there? Why are these children not comprehending text? It's not word recognition and language comprehension. The two-factor models would say, give them more language comprehension. They can read the words, but it's not doing the trick. So that is why situations like that, the fact that the two-factor models are not explaining outcomes for every child, that's why my colleague Nell Duke and I proposed the active view of reading. Understanding these students' difficulties and closing reading opportunity gaps means that we need to take a more nuanced view of reading that's informed by recent science. This model came out in 2021. And it reflects the evidence. There's scientific evidence that word recognition over here and language comprehension over here are not separate buckets of skills. And the other models tend to make us think that way, but they're not separate. They actually overlap and they interact. And in fact, this shared portion between them in study after study is bigger than the independent portions of the others alone. So let's think about this. So bridging, word recognition and language comprehension need to be integrated by readers. They, like fluency, we are decoding while processing meaning. Morphology supports both word recognition and meaning construction, because we're figuring out what words mean and how they fit into the overall model of text meaning. So this bridging processes component is new, representing that overlap and the requirement that readers have to coordinate these processes to be good comprehenders. And the other piece that's new is that reading is active. Reading requires that kids actively self-regulate so that they drive their word recognition, drive their language comprehension, and actively integrate the two to make reading comprehension happen. And we tested this model. Well, let me take a step back. I'll get to the testing in a second. This model leads us to ask the same questions we asked with the other two models, but also, can our students coordinate and integrate word recognition and language comprehension skills? And do they have the active self-regulation skills they need to make word recognition and language comprehension happen and to coordinate them in service of comprehension? And so before we move on, I want to use our friends Ernie and Bert here to illustrate what I mean about bridging being different from the other two and separate and extra skill. We all have played the game, pat your head, rub your tummy. I can pat my head all by itself and be fine. I can assess word recognition and it looks fine. I can rub my tummy and it's easy by itself. And when I assess language comprehension by itself, kids do fine. But when I have to do them together, it's harder. It takes a weird third coordination ability. And when we're asking kids to comprehend text, we're not asking them to do word recognition by itself and language comprehension by itself. We're asking them to integrate these processes, which is harder because it requires that coordination. So when we tested this model, I should note it's an instructional model. Every component in the model, when taught, improves reading comprehension. And we tested this with an instructional meta-analysis, meaning that we looked at studies that taught these constructs and had reading comprehension outcomes. And we saw that word recognition and language comprehension had significant effects when taught on reading comprehension outcomes. And bridging processes and active self-regulation processes had additional significant effects over and above those we saw with word recognition and language comprehension. So this model gives us additional targets for intervention, which are especially effective with our students who are our neediest learners, who need extra.
All right, so let's go back to what we know. Let's look at Scarborough's reading rope. We know the word recognition skills and those language comprehension skills. And those same skills are embedded in the active view of reading. But as more research has become more available and they were looking at what else is going on, they found that some of these skills overlap and support both word recognition and language comprehension. And those are those bridging processes. This is what we're talking about. So our students who, like Andrew and Sarah, who are able to decode the words, but still struggle with that comprehension, there's some level of bridging process. These might be some of the reasons why they're struggling with being able to make meaning of what they're reading, especially when they can talk to you and tell you the things that they have heard or understand. But when they do the reading themselves, they're struggling. Those are those bridging processes. So here's an example. Vocabulary is connected to language comprehension because, well, meaning of the word. But vocabulary is also connected to word recognition. So if I read the word present, but we're actually talking about birthday gifts, then I would know, oh, I would pronounce this present. Even though both of those words have the same letters, I'm going to say it the way is based on the meaning, depending on what we're talking about. So let's zoom in a little bit more just on this active view of reading. One of the things I love is how Dr. Duke and Dr. Cartwright visually mapped this for the overlapping skills and how active self-regulation can be seen to impact all of these different components. Another benefit with this is that it is a reader model. So we can think about this as, how do I ask more nuanced questions about what my students can and can't do? We can do the same questions. Do they have all of these word recognition skills? Do they have the language and knowledge and skills that they need? Those are the same questions we ask with the other models, but here we can go deeper and talk about, well, how are they doing with coordinating? How are they integrating these word recognition and language comprehension skills? And then we can go a step further and ask, well, do they even have those self-regulation skills to be able to focus long enough or to be able to keep their mind thinking about what they're reading as they're reading? There's just so many different aspects that we can think about as we're doing this. And the part that's exciting is that we can actually teach all of these. This is not just a model to find where we might have an issue or where a student might be struggling. This is a model where we can then tie that and connect it to instruction to help our students be able to read. So that once again, that integration piece, the ability to be able to coordinate multiple things like the word recognition and the language comprehension, that's that same idea of being able to pat your head and rub your belly. All right, so Dr. Cartwright does an excellent job connecting all of this to what you've already learned in LETRS. So I'm going to let her keep going. This clip is not as long as that last one. And then we'll talk through and go through some of these models that you all went through in LETRS.
Support. Now I want to attach this to something that you learned in your LETRS training to help you think about how we coordinate and integrate word recognition and language comprehension. And this is orthographic mapping. Orthographic mapping, according to Linnea Airy, is connecting letter sounds, right? Spellings, pronunciations, and meanings of specific words in memory. We orthographically map words and they become sight words when we connect up the spellings, the sounds, and the meanings. So D-O-G, D-D-O-A-G, G, and that becomes the pronunciation of the word dog. And oh, that's my dog. She's Cammy and she's upstairs not barking, thankfully. But this process, and as an aside, I want to note that the research shows that teaching individual phoneme, grapheme correspondences is what's important for orthographic mapping to make these sight words stick. When we teach chunks of letters, it's not as effective as when we teach individual letter sound correspondences. And the next slide tells you why. And I should also note that executive skills facilitate links between these components. And this is why, because we have reading brains. That's my granddaughter, had to bring her in. So she's learning how to connect sounds to meaning. So when she says mama and dada, and she's now calling me nana for granny, good enough, I'll take it. When she says those things, she uses the parts of her brain that she came with, the part that's devoted to meanings, the parts that's devoted to sounds. And your excellent instruction builds the visual portion. It builds that letterbox. It repurposes part of the visual brain. You're literally changing brains. It blows my mind. And you're repurposing that part of the visual brain and hooking it into the other parts. So just like with orthographic mapping, we're hooking spellings to sounds to meanings. And that excellent instruction, what we know from the research on how the reading brain is built, needs to have those individual sound rather than chunks of sounds and letters at the same time. So those individual letter sound connections are what's so important for building that letterbox. And what we know about this is that our executive skills, which are in our frontal lobes behind our forehead, they create links between these hubs in the reading brain. And kids like Andrew and Sarah and kids with dyslexia have weaker executive skills and weaker links in their reading brain. And that's something that we can change with instruction.
So that is exciting. We're going to go back to what she just said. Our kids are not stuck. Kids with dyslexia and reading comprehension difficulties have weaker executive skills and weaker links in their reading brains. And that's something we can change with instruction. So let's jump in. What is it that we can actually do? Well, we've learned about orthographic mapping in LETRS, which is that mental process that we use to store and retrieve words. We've also learned that it involves multiple layers of language of a word. And the more students know about the word, the better they will be able to understand and retrieve the word as they're reading. Dr. Cartwright did point out a very important factor about the phonology piece, that each sound, we want to focus on those individual sounds of a word, and we don't want to show chunks of words. That's more helpful in this orthographic mapping process. And all of these fit into our bridging processes. When we connect the words to the meaning, to the sounds, all of that is part of those bridging processes that we've been talking about. We don't teach orthographic mapping. It's just the mental process that we go through to move a new word from something where we're sounding out sound by sound each word to a word that we see and immediately recognize, or we say that we've moved this word into our mental word bank. Another place in LETRS that aligns with this bridging process is the 4-part processing model for word recognition. So let's talk about this process again. We're going back to these models, and we're going to do this quickly so you can get right into that classroom instruction. So if I see the word clip, my orthographic processor notices first the letters C-L-I-M-P. Then my phonological processor connects those letters to the sounds k, u, I, but that's the phonics. That's the decoding piece, right? I'm connecting the word, the letter sounds, and I'm being now able to read this word. So I say, oh, this is clip. but I don't actually know which clip this word is talking about because there's a lot of different meanings of clip. So my meaning processor then says, is it a paper clip? Is it a way I would clip a flower? Is it a hair clip? So then I have to look at the context in which this word is being shared. So I go to my sentence. She wanted to clip the flowers before they wilted. And now I know, oh, there we go, this clip. This whole process is integrating word recognition and language comprehension. This is this idea that it's not one or the other. We have these other components that are integrating the skills and helping us make those connections. So one of the things that we can always do is bring in meaning after we've taught the word, and we're focusing more on the decoding and how to read the word. Then we can share a little bit about the meaning as well. So one of the things we created to help with your deepening everyone's understanding around the active view of reading is we created a brief on the active view of reading. And in that brief, and that should be going into the chat or might already be in there, in that brief, we have a table which talks through some of these bridging processes and how they connect to word recognition and how they connect to language comprehension. So I'll share the fluency one with you now. In fluency, we know that fluency is how we look at rate, accuracy, and expression. That's when we know when we're reading fluently. Well, rate and accuracy reflect a student's decoding ability, and prosody or expression reflects their understanding of the meaning. So fluency itself is one of those bridging processes because there's a word recognition connection and a language comprehension connection. We've also looked at the reading brain. So you know all of these from LETRS, where you talked about the different parts and how the brain comes together. So the new piece for our reading brain is really when we think about this and the different pathways that are being connected when we see the word and connected to the letters, is that our executive function skills are also part of that process and how we're able to build those pathways. So we are going to look at myth number 5. Whoops, not too far. Sorry. We're going to look at myth number 5, which is the simple view of reading is, or the science of reading is only the simple view of reading and Scarborough's reading group. And the answer is no, we already know that. The science of reading is not just these two models. It's research that inspires the model. The body of research inspires the models that come out. And as research grows, our models are going to continue to update. So we're going to take a deep dive into some of those executive function skills that were mentioned earlier, and then we'll go to those key components of comprehension. All right, so let's start with
that active self-regulation bubble of the active view of reading, the executive function skills. You might have heard executive functions or executive skills, but these are skills that help us to be CEOs of our own brains. So we're managing our own brains. I've got 2 screens and a clicker and all these ideas. I'm managing all of this in my working memory, and I'm shifting between things. When we leave the house with our cup of coffee and our keys and our phone and our purse and our book bag and all of those things, and we're not forgetting anything, and we're not forgetting the child who we take to school. All of those things rely on our organization and our planning and our working memory and our ability to shift attention when needed. Those kinds of skills help us to do all the things. All the things. They are mental skills we use to manage our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to achieve goals, and they're at the heart of self-regulation. And in reading, they help us manage comprehension. And for a long time, we thought that you measure general executive skills and that they're going to influence reading skills, but that's not how it happens. We now know that reading requires that our executive control over reading develops within reading. So we learn to exert our executive control over reading when we're reading and managing aspects of tasks. Those reading specific executive skills contribute to comprehension beyond other important predictors, and we can teach them. That's the beauty. But importantly, when we teach, we have to understand that weak executive control over reading undermines reading comprehension. So we're putting the thinking on the table in very concrete ways to help our students and support those weak executive skills. So these are the ones that are weak in students like Andrew and Sarah: planning, organization, cognitive flexibility, inhibition, working memory. I've given you examples here of how they play out in reading. You're reading with a goal in mind. You're recognizing and using text and language structure, shifting between letter, sound, and meaning focus aspects, which Andrew and Sarah don't do. It's suppressing irrelevant word meanings or holding multiple text parts in mind to make inferences and supply our own knowledge. So you can see how these components of comprehension and these mental skills that help us do those components of comprehension, if they're all weak, we have a problem. We can't weave together this.
So let's pause here for a second. And there's a big idea that I want to point out that Dr. Cartwright mentioned. We focus on, we strengthen, we practice these executive function skills within the context of reading, not outside. So if I'm having my students plan a classroom party, I can't expect their planning skills to improve in reading. But if I'm teaching them how to read with a goal in mind, then they'll be able to read with a goal in mind. We do that within the context of reading, not outside. So when we explicitly teach students the processes of comprehension, we also build executive function skills because we're putting the thinking on the table. We make thinking visible, and this supports our executive functioning, our executive function skills. So this is a really big takeaway from today, is that we are going to explicitly teach how to comprehend. And in doing that, we're supporting these executive function skills. We want to be our kids to be able to see how we're thinking, and then help them to be able to comprehend. So again, in the same brief that we shared, we have this table. In the table, there are the different active self-regulation constructs. They have the definitions, and then provide some examples and application to classroom on how you can manage, how you can be teaching these skills in the context of reading. That's that big important takeaway for this. All right, we are going to share one more video about the key components of comprehension, and then we're going to turn it over to Mary, and she's going to take all this information and connect it to your classroom application, and I'm really excited to get to that part.
Read. And that research helps us to identify key comprehension components so that we can support students like Andrew and Sarah. And these are just a few of the citations. There are decades of research. This OEL paper is one where she reviews her 4 decades of research that she's done on kids just like Andrew and Sarah. And the things that emerge in that research are things like recognizing and using text structures, both expository and narrative text structures, recognizing and using language structures like syntax, phrases and sentences, right? And morphology, the structure within individual words. So see, structures can be at the word level, the sentence level, the text level, and also integration and inference skills. Inference skills are tough because, again, they're invisible, kids can't see them. And if we're making an inference, it's often from stuff that's not even in the text, right? We make text connecting inferences that are also called text-based or local coherence inferences. So we're helping to build coherence bit by bit as we make our way through a text. Gap-filling inferences are knowledge-based. This is why we talk about the importance of knowledge to comprehension. Global coherence inferences. So we're filling in gaps in the text with our own knowledge to get an overall picture of what the text is about. But we also are making inferences about word meanings. If we come to a text or a word in a text that we don't know the meaning of, we can use context to figure out the meaning. I didn't add a caveat here. I don't think I need to because of your excellent training, but I'm just going to say we're not using context to figure out how to pronounce a word, how to decode a word. Context is for meaning. Our marvelous word recognition skills are for decoding, okay? So meanings. What else? Well, recognizing and using what I call sticky words that promote coherence. Things like pronoun references and understanding that my granddaughter Ellie likes bananas. She ate a banana at my house. She, Ellie, they connect together and provide that sticky glue that sticks those sentences together. So pronoun references, connectives also help us, like because or so or on the other hand or and. All of those conjunctions help us to stick ideas in a text together. And knowledge and vocabulary, especially vocabulary depth, are things that can be taught explicitly. And kids like Andrew and Sarah have trouble with each of these things. So when we think vocabulary depth, we think about knowing things about words. Remember, knowing more about an individual word. So knowing that the word ball can mean a fancy dance and it can mean sporting equipment, and there's oodles of kinds of sporting equipment that, or you could have the ball of your foot even. There are lots of meanings for the word ball. There are synonyms for ball, maybe sports equipment or toy, where people may use that to substitute for ball in a text. Knowing antonyms, lots of depth of knowledge about words is important. And monitoring comprehension, being able to recognize when something in the text is inconsistent or when we missed an important detail and need to go.
All right, so we are now ready to take all of these different comprehension components and apply this to classroom practice. So I'm going to turn this over to Mary, and she is going to jump in and talk through how to apply this to classroom.
Great. Thank you, Angela. So let's talk about this is such great information, but the hard thing to do is take research, right? And all of this wonderful knowledge and translate it into my classroom. What does this look like in my classroom, right? That is the burning question. What is it supposed to look like? Well, we're not going to go, I'm not going to give you a comprehensive answer today, but I am going to give you some things to chew on that I believe will be a launching point for you to take these ideas and think about what could this look like in my classroom. Okay, we can go to the next slide there, Angela. So here are the questions I want you to keep front of mind as we go through this last part together. When does this work fit into my literacy block? Remember, Angela showed us those schedules, and we've got our word recognition, we've got our language comprehension, we've got our writing, but we want to keep those boundaries between those permeable, right? Because my bridging processes, remember, reading is not just those two major components, right? We want to cross the boundaries within our day, and we're going to look at that explicitly in just a second to see what that looks like. All right, and then the materials. I want you to think about your materials as we go here, okay? I want you to think about, do my materials contain this? Do my materials prompt me to explicitly teach those comprehension processes? And if not, how can I layer that in? All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to think about a scenario. Here's our scenario. All right. Here's our scenario. We're going to teach the key components of comprehension, what Dr. Cartwright just talked to us about. We're going to put the thinking on the table and make it visible for students. So let's look at this scenario. We're third grade. We're in third grade. We're third grade teachers. We're teaching a unit on ancient Rome. Okay. The length of the unit is 15 days. And I'm getting ready to teach lessons for days 6, 7, and 8 about in this ancient Rome unit. So I want you to keep in mind that there has been knowledge built prior to these lessons, and there will be knowledge built after these lessons around ancient Rome. So these lessons are situated within a knowledge building unit. And we've got kids like Andrew and Sarah in our classroom. We've been trained in letters, and now we want to think about the key components of comprehension and how I'm going to put the thinking on the table when I teach this text. And our text is called The Lost City of Pompeii. I generated it using ChatGPT just for the purposes of this webinar. Everything I'm doing with you right now today is just for the purposes of this webinar. It's not meant to be exemplar materials or exemplary materials for you to use. So I want you to think about what else should I be doing during my comprehension instruction with the lost city of Pompeii beyond asking questions. Asking questions is great. We're going to use that strategy. That's not going anywhere. But we want to do more than that. We want to make those comprehension processes visible. So let's go ahead to our next slide. The outcome is not going to happen if they don't get instruction in the process. I love that so much. Comprehension involves building a structure, a mental model in our head as we read. So to comprehend, I have to take the pieces that are in the text and the pieces that are in my head, and I have to think of them as building blocks like Legos, right? And you're going to actively put those pieces together to create a unified whole. That's the mental model. Parts come from the text, parts come from my brain, parts come from what I already know. But the goal is cohesion. So here is that hard part. How do I take the processes that are invisible and make my thinking visible for students? And as we consider delivering our instruction to students, the planning phase is where I need to spend my time making sure that I am identifying the knowledge, the vocabulary, the structures, the inference making that kids are going to have to do, the sticky words that are in this text, and the comprehension strategies that students will need to use in order to create that coherent mental model. I'm going to be very intentional in my planning. So I'm going to make sure that my materials have that built in. And if they don't, then I am going to be intentional about putting them into my lesson in a way that aligns with what we have learned here. Now, one great tool that you have from your LETRS training is the comprehension planning checklist. You can see an image of it there. And you can use that as a thinking map for yourself as a teacher to plan out how you're going to make these processes visible for students. And you can use it as a tool to think about, am I hitting those key components with my text? So let's think about that with the lost city of Pompeii. All right, we have to familiarize ourselves with the text. Oh my goodness, this is the work of planning. The text is at the center of planning. The text is at the center of our planning. I want you to say that to yourself because it is so very important. We're going to first familiarize ourselves with the text we're reading. This is crucial because the text is going to drive and determine what we need to explicitly teach to help students construct that coherent mental model. All right, so remember, Andrew and Sarah, they have this pile of Lego bricks, and it's my job as the teacher to make the invisible processes of comprehension as visible as possible for them so that they can learn to construct their own mental model when they read independently. So the teacher is going to I've got to identify what's the key knowledge that they need to build a mental model of the lost city of Pompeii. What vocabulary is in this story that my kids are going to need to have a breadth and depth knowledge of? What are the structures in this story that are going to make it challenging? And that can be the text structure itself. It could be the structure of some of the words. It could be the structure of some of the sentences. What are the inferences that my students are going to have to make to be able to build that mental model? What are those sticky words that are going to tie ideas together? Those words like because, so, those connectives that we heard Dr. Cartwright talk about. And so I want to make sure that I'm going to explicitly teach those. So the big picture of the lost city of Pompeii, I'm going to tell it to you. This text, what I want kids to get out of this text after I read it and reread it and read it again, is that I want them to walk away understanding that Mount Vesuvius erupted, and that event led to Pompeii being buried under ash and the city was preserved. Then centuries later, archaeologists discovered the city, and we've learned all about ancient Rome because that city was preserved. Right. So I'm going through that and I'm thinking to myself, what are those key components of comprehension that I need to teach? Here you see just a general overview of these lessons. This is my thinking. It's a thinking map. It's not meant to be an exemplar lesson here, okay? But so you see there that I've got standards, the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. Those are our end targets, right? I'm going to use those. That's what my kids have to be able to demonstrate those standards with this text so that I know that they can understand it, right? So at the end of my 3 days, I'm going to ask my students to demonstrate their understanding of RI 3.3. I bet lots of you are familiar with it. They're going to describe the relationship between a series of historical events using language that pertains to cause and effect. Okay. Now, I'm not teaching that standard in isolation. There are other standards that I'm teaching along the way, and I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping the text itself at the center and teaching them what they need to know to be able to create that mental model, okay? So just keeping that in mind. So for my first read, Unit 2, Lesson 6, let's check that out. When during the literacy block is this going to happen? Well, it's going to happen during the language comprehension time of my day. But I want you to pay attention because there are going to be some things that I'm going to do during this language comprehension time that you might think to yourself, oh, well, I would normally do that during word recognition. So I've been really intentional in paying attention to including instruction in the bridging processes of vocabulary, morphology, and building fluency during this language comprehension time of my literacy block. And I'm pointing this out because that active view reading reminds us that teaching reading is more complex than just teaching those two major components. We need to be intentional about providing instruction that supports the ability to coordinate word recognition and language comprehension. So here we go. And that first lesson here, okay, I put my thinking about the text into the comprehension planning checklist to plan out how I wanted to support students in building that mental model, all right? So I looked at what makes this text complex, and what I noticed was that the structure of the text is cause and effect, which is challenging for students. So can I get an amen from any teachers, anybody out there who's ever tried to teach cause and effect, right? It is incredibly challenging for students. So I know I need to be explicit in addressing the structure of the text. In addition, this text draws on the assumption that students know that Pompeii is in Italy. That was part of ancient Rome, that was long ago, right? That ancient means very, very old. And remember, this is situated within my knowledge building unit. So in our pretend world here, we've already done some knowledge building. Finally, the author uses words and phrases that connect the cause and effects together throughout this text, such as because, as a result, caused, led to, etc. So I know I'll need to explicitly teach students how to use those sticky words to connect the cause and effect ideas within this text. In my planning, I was careful to address these components of comprehension so that by the end of the first read, my students would be able to identify the gist of what the text is about. I want them to be able to state that the eruption of Mount Vesuvius caused the city of Pompeii to be buried under many feet of ash. So everything I do is going to drive my students toward that end. So for my first reading of the text, I want to make sure that students are getting that big picture. That's the most important thing to do with this first read is get the gist. So here, really quickly, this is just how I would connect to that background knowledge. I would use these pictures here, to show this is ancient Rome. Here it is today, and there's this volcano in the background, this mountain in the background. And so I'm going to make sure that I'm activating that background knowledge. A word of caution here. Don't let your warm-up be longer than your workout. So your before the read is your warm-up. You don't want that to overtake the work of reading the text, right? You don't want your warm-up, which is the before the read, to be longer than the workout. I learned that from Dr. Kristen Conradi Smith. I loved that analogy and I wanted to share it with you. All right, so let's look at these key components of comprehension, and Dr. Cartwright is going to teach us about how to use the text structure as a frame to hang the rest of the ideas in the text on. Then we'll discuss what that could look like with our text.
Before we talk about structure, I'm going to do structure, bridging, vocabulary depth, and inference really quickly. So cognitive science shows us that when we build knowledge structures in our minds, we do it gradually, starting with a basic framework, then adding details to get to that whole. So we're building a text structure. We don't start with details. If I'm having them read closely and parse individual words, that doesn't help them see the big picture. Start with a framework and help them to hang the details onto that framework. Research shows this also works for building models of text meaning, like this CAT strategy that I'm going to show you on the next slide. The bottom line here is that it's harder to think about the details before you have an overall framework to hang them on. So here we see, and there are articles about this strategy at these links. Here we see that we can use text structure to help kids build that mental model of text meaning. So we start with a question to identify whether the text fits one of these three general structures. And then we use a sentence stem, a basic little bitty structure, to help them get a general idea of what it's about, that main idea of what the text is about. And once they do that, then they have that thing to hang, that framework to hang more details on. And then they can add more details to create a summary. And this is analogous to what we just saw with the house. Framing comes first, then we add the details. You do not put in countertops and light fixtures before you have done the framing. Framing happens first to provide a mental framework and support that weak working memory for kids who don't have it. You can also directly teach expository text structures, again, supporting their noticing and using of organization. You can.
Okay, so remember, we want our students to get the big picture of the text during that first read. So we need to make sure they have a framework. I love that, to hang the details from the text on, and the text structure helps us do that. Now, I'm not going to use the CAT strategy exactly, but I'm going to talk about what I am going to do. I want to use the text structure as the frame for my mental model of this text. So I'm going to establish that during my first read. Okay, so back to our lesson. How will we make this come alive in the classroom? Here's what I'm going to do to explicitly design my instruction so that students are able to start with that framework. Before reading, I'm going to tell students this text is telling us about history. Often historical texts are organized by telling you about a major event that happened and then telling you about other events that happened because of that event, right? What else happened, or the results of that event. Like in our story today, we're going to read about a major, very scary event that takes place in Pompeii long ago. And when authors use this structure in writing, it's called cause and effect. The author will often use certain words that signal to us the way they are sticking those ideas together. And I'm going to reference here some common signal words or sticky words in this text. I'm going to have those up in my room. I'm going to have that chart up because this is not the first rodeo with cause and effect text. We are going to revisit this text structure again and again and again throughout the year. We're going to revisit this standard again and again and again throughout the year because whenever our text lends itself to it, we're going to use this frame to hang our ideas on, right? This frame of this is how the author is organizing the text. So then I'm going to tell students that today I want you to pay attention to what scary event happened in Pompeii and what else happened because of that scary event. And while we read, I'm going to use this graphic organizer. This is from LETRS, guys. Volume 2, Appendix B, that cause and effect map. And you can tweak it however you want, but I would use that to make my thinking visible as we go through. All right, so then here we go. We're going to read it together here. I'm not going to read this for you, but I would read this out loud to students. I would use the best expression to engage them. I want them to hear prosody in my voice. I want them to hear that fluent reading because they need those models in order to copy that, right? Like if we want students to read fluently, they need to hear models of fluent reading. And so I want them to hear me reading it. And this is our first read. So I'm going to read, I'm going to set them up. I'm going to read and I'm going to stop after paragraph 4 and I am going to think out loud for them. Oh, wow. I found that scary event that happened. Here it is, Mount Vesuvius. It erupted. That is scary, right? The eruption of a volcano. So I've got this scary event. If I keep reading, I see that the eruption caused or made another event happen. The city was buried. What? Oh my gosh. I'm going to put those things up on my cause and effect graphic organizer. I'm probably going to just have it pre-written so I can just stick it up there because I want to keep kids engaged in this text. So I'm going to say, let's keep reading and find out what else happened because of this eruption. So you see how I'm making my thinking visible, but I'm keeping kids focused on the text and I'm keeping them focused on what we want to pay attention to, which is that major event that caused some other things to happen. Okay, so, all right, then I'm going to discuss. So after we read, we've got our cause, we've got our effect. I told them to pay attention to what happened in Pompeii before we started. And so I'm going to say, guys, let's come up with the big idea, that conclusion down at the bottom. Let's use this cause and effect to come up with a big idea. And I'm going to give them some sentence stems here. Whisper to your partner what major event happened in Pompeii long ago. And I'm going to have them whisper it. We're going to share it out and then say it in a complete sentence. Okay, yeah, long ago, Mount Vesuvius erupted, a volcano near Pompeii. It erupted. And now I'm going to say, well, what else happened? What happened because of Mount Vesuvius erupting? And they're going to whisper it and we're going to share it, right? And then we're going to develop this gist statement together using a sentence frame, right? So what was that main cause and that main event? And I am going to help them notice those sticky words when we look back at this. And I'm going to say, what major event happened in Pompeii and what was the main effect of that event? And we're going to create that statement together, right? So I'm going to say the Mount Vesuvius erupted and that caused the city of Pompeii to be buried under many feet of ash. All right, so you get the gist here, right? We're getting a gist for the story itself. And we are thinking about those sticky words. We're bringing those sticky words to the surface there. Now, I'm going to intentionally include a chance for students to hear me reading aloud. I mentioned this already with expression. This is paramount for students to hear. And so I just wanted to lift that up for you. We can keep going to this next part. Now, so in our first read, we hung our details and I didn't model it for you explicitly. You can do that. I'm trying to make my own thinking visible for you as a teacher, right? So we got the gist. We used the structure to get the gist of the lost city of Pompeii. Now in my next, and I brought attention to the sticky words, okay? Which I'm pulling on some knowledge that we have already have about those. We've done that before, and we're pulling on that knowledge about cause and effect, that those sticky words are going to be in that text. And we're going to come back to it, don't worry. So in my second lesson, on lesson 7, which is my second day, I'm going to intentionally I want my students to really look at vocabulary. So now we're going to dig in and deepen our understanding of how the eruption of Mount Vesuvius preserved history. So to do that, I want to teach the following components of comprehension explicitly. Vocabulary depth. To deepen their understanding and figure out how this eruption of the volcano preserved history, students must understand the meaning of the words erupted, preserved, and this phrase frozen in time. I'm going to use morphology, the structure of the words, to build students' understanding of the words erupted and preserved. And we'll look at that in just a moment. I'm going to explicitly teach the meaning of the phrase frozen in time. I'm not going to belabor that today, but I would explicitly teach that as well. And I would do that before reading. And then I'm going to make sure that I address the inferences that I know my students need to make in order to come to that enduring understanding. So they're going to need to make some local coherence inferences to ensure that they understand these words in context, which is going to deepen their understanding of how the eruption ultimately preserved the city of Pompeii. So you'll see, you can see that on my comprehension planning checklist, I am going to make sure that I tell my students today we're reading to understand how Mount Vesuvius preserved history. We'll pay close attention to the important vocabulary and language the author uses. Words like eruption and preserved and the phrase frozen in time. And as we read, we're going to explore these words and what they mean and how they help us understand the importance of what happened in Pompeii so long ago. So I'm tying it to my content. So there are some words in the story that are really important to understanding it, and I would tell the students we're going to do those together before we read. So let's look at, before we do that, Dr. Cartwright is going to talk to us about using word structure for teaching important vocabulary words that support meaning making in text. She
Explicitly teach.
Go ahead. No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Structure. Explicitly teach structure with morphology via word frames. So here you might teach roots, suffixes, and prefixes and have them take words apart. Think, ing, and explain why you're taking it apart this way, how it helps you decode, how it helps you notice meaning.
All right, so here's what I'm going to do in my story before that second read in order to teach students the meaning of the word erupted. So this is pulling from the Explicit Vocabulary Routine in Letters, Volume 2, Unit 5. And so the first important word I'm going to teach them is erupted. And you can see here that I've got the boxes that represent those word frames. So I've got the meaningful word parts. And I would say, okay, guys, the word is erupted. Everyone say erupted. And I'm going to use this, this strategy that we learned. This word starts with E, the prefix E, which often means out of. So I'm going to explicitly teach that. Rupt, that's the base or the root. Rupt means break or burst or tear. And the suffix ed, we know this one, it means it already happened. So erupted here, I can figure out what it means by putting those word parts together. E means out of, rupt means break or burst out, right? And ed means it happened in the past. So erupted means bursted out of, and it already happened. So here's an example. The volcano erupted in Hawaii. Then I would have students provide an example of eruptions or erupted, right? I'm not going to belabor this routine. You do it far better than I do, but I'm going to combine that routine with teaching the morphology of the word here. And so then I would say, okay, I'm going to write the word erupted. I want you to write the word erupted. I want them to say the word. I want them to know that it's a verb and it tells what happened or what something did. I'm going to use this same strategy for the word preserved. Preserved is a critical word in our story, both eruption and preserved. So I'm going to do the same thing with the word preserved. I would do the same thing with that phrase frozen in time. I would make that meaning very clear to students and make sure that before our second read, we had some instruction around that. So now let's go ahead and go to the during the read. Okay, so I want to teach these key components of comprehension. I want to make it visible, and we are going to do some inferencing. Once I've explicitly taught the words and phrases, I'm going to have students reread the text with their partner. This puts the onus of reading on the student. I've provided scaffolds. Now I want them to read the text. Remember, we can build fluency during the word recognition time of the day, but we also can build fluency during this language comprehension, this reading comprehension time of the day as well. This is a short text, so I'm going to have students read it with their partner, noticing the words erupted, preserved, and the phrase frozen in time. They can highlight those words as they notice them. Then we'll come back together and we're going to do a close read of the text together. So I'm going to ask them, after they've read it together, then read it with a partner, then we're going to come back, we're going to read it again. We're going to read it aloud together. We're going to stop at spots in the text that I've already marked strategically, and we're going to discuss in order to make meaning. I'm not going to tell you all the places that we would stop and make meaning, but I'm going to pull out for you where we would do it with our vocabulary words. right, just a little tip here, just a time saver. You may already be doing this, but mark up your text, right? Mark up your text, put sticky notes in there so that it's easier for you to use and see. Now let's look at Dr. Kelly Cartwright. She's going to tell us about why we need to explicitly teach students to make inferences and how we can make our thinking visible for students. Then we'll look at how we would do that with our text about Pompeii.
And finally, inferences. I typically tell students that authors don't write everything down and they expect readers to figure out missing information. So thinking about Sadie, you probably inferred Sadie's a dog, the stranger's an intruder, and the stranger. And finally, everything down and they expect readers to figure out missing information. So thinking about Sadie, you probably inferred Sadie's a dog, the stranger's an intruder, and the stranger is entering Sadie's home. Well, you filled the gap with Sadie. Sadie could be a girl or a mom, or number two is a local coherence text connecting inference. And then number three is a global coherence gap filling inference because we're assuming Sadie's home. It could be a store. We don't know where she is. And this kind of inferencing demands working memory. And so it means that we need to put that process on the table. This is all the stuff you had to hold in your head. Barking and broken window came from text. Sadie and intruder came from your own knowledge. And this is a lot to hold in your working memory if working memory is something you struggle with. And so I'm going to show you how we can map inferences and again, put that thinking on the table for students. So with this little story, it was 8:55 and the school bell rings at 9 and Andy was pedaling as fast as he could because he was worried he might miss his test. If I ask where he's going, you're going to tell me school. Text connecting inference. If I ask how he's getting there, you'll probably say riding a bike, but it could be a paddle boat, it could be a big wheel, it could be a unicycle, but you'll probably say bike. These are hard for kids, and this is why, because they have to hold all of that stuff in their working memory. So if we provide concrete, visible supports, put that thinking on the table and map inferences this way. So text information is here that we have to link up, and then showing students how their own knowledge gets supplied to make it make sense. That concrete inference mapping improves reading comprehension for kids like Andrew and Sarah in expository texts and in narrative texts.
Okay, so I want to do that concrete inference mapping. I love that, where I'm going to stop and ask questions. I've marked it in the text beforehand. And this is what I would do. I'm going to stop, I'm going to discuss with students and make sure that they're building that mental model. So after reading this paragraph containing this sentence, without warning, Mount Vesuvius erupted with fire, ash, and gas. I am going to stop and say, well, what does erupted mean in this sentence, right? Bursted out of. What words help me understand the meaning of erupted? All right, and we'll talk through that. Then I'm going to say to the students, I want you to describe how the fire, the ash, and the gas came out of the volcano to your partner, but I want you to do it without using the word erupted. And so that's where we're going to map that inference. And I'm going to explicitly put my thinking on the table for the students by taking them through, well, what do we know from the text? You can see that there. And what do we know in our head? And so how could we explain it, right? We know that without warning, the volcano erupted. There was fire, ash, and gas. I know in my head that erupted means bursted out of. I know that explosions are a burst of fire, right? And so I could say the fire, ash, and gas bursted out of Mount Vesuvius like an explosion, right? Now, I've got another example of that here, but we're going to, for the sake of time, we're going to keep moving forward. And again, I just want to remind you, after the read, I would have students respond using those vocabulary words. I want to build depth of vocabulary with multiple exposures. I don't just explicitly teach it and then we don't use it again. We're coming back to it again and again throughout the week, those words that I want students to really own. Let's go ahead to the next one. All right, our last day here, we're going to quickly go through this. So for our third read, this is where I'm going to really address those sticky words. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you guys two. We can go to the next slide here. I'm also, before reading, I'm going to address the vocabulary again. This is going to be my before reading activity where we're hitting preserved and destroyed, which is also in the text. It's an antonym. That's where I would do that scaling gradable antonyms with students. I would do that activity. It's straight from LETRS Volume 2, Unit 5, Session 5 to give practice with those vocabulary words from the text. And then let's look at, again, I'm going to have the students read together. They're going to partner read together because I want to build that fluency, have them read with one another. I'm going to use the partner reading routine in LETRS. There's a video here that you can use from our LETRS PLC. And then we'll go ahead and go to the next component, those sticky words. So after reading, I'm going to do a mini lesson around those sticky words. It's not the first time I've done it, but I'm going to do this mini lesson with students because I want to make sure that they can identify those connecting words, the ideas that they're connecting. Here's the idea. The eruption was important. The other idea is it buried the city and helped us learn about life long ago. The sticky word is because. So we would make those sentences together using those sticky words that I've got listed there. You can see that. I would do a practice, and then I would have them actually construct some sentences like you see here on the screen. I'm doing that explicit teaching for students. And then at the very end, I'm going to have students demonstrate their understanding. This is where they are going to respond. Why was the eruption of Mount Vesuvius important? I have spent all this time building that understanding and that knowledge, building that mental model. And now I'm going to ask students to demonstrate that. I've set them up to demonstrate that throughout these 3 days. And then they're going to respond in writing using that sentence frame. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius was important because this led to, as a result, right? And so, and they're going to write a paragraph for me to demonstrate their understanding. And that was a real quick and dirty look at how that might play out in your classroom.
Thank you, Mary, for putting that together and for sharing that with everybody about how we can really put the thinking on the table in terms of reading comprehension. So just a quick couple last things. We shared some of these look-fors with your school administrators, so we wanted to share them with you and let you know that these are some of the things that we talked about with administrators as well, so they might have some conversations with you. The main takeaway being that comprehension is a process, and we can put our thinking on the table to support executive function skills and teach comprehension components. And then finally, we want to, like this bottom one down here, explicitly teach coherence as the goal and targeting comprehension components to help our students actually build that coherent model of text meaning. So we were not sure if we'd have some extra time for you to put down your reflections. This was in that handout at the very beginning, so I hope you take a little bit of time this afternoon to think about what were some connections that you made, things you already knew, ideas you want to come back to, and then questions you still have for us to answer. We would love for you to complete the survey before you head out today. This whole thing was recorded, so we will send a video to everybody that was here through email once we're done. And what's next? We have our next score session is actually tomorrow. So this is for your school administrators with Dr. Courtney Hatton, and it is on comprehension and knowledge. And the registration link for that should be in the chat now in case you wanted to join, or if you're wanting to see the original webinar. Your educators score plus teach session for comprehension and knowledge will be on Thursday, December 18th at 3. We are going to take what Dr. Courtney or Dr. Hatton talks about in her session, and then we will do the same kind of thing and share how to apply that to classroom practice and make some connections in LETRS from that one as well. In the survey, we have asked for your opinion on whether Tuesdays or Thursdays are better, whether 3 o'clock, 3:30, or 4:30 is better. So we are wanting to be the most helpful to educators. We know everybody's schedules are different, so we'll look at all of the feedback around the best time to have these webinars moving forward. For right now, we have Thursday, December 18th at 3, based on the feedback, we might change the timing a little bit on that, but it will be on Thursday, December 18th. So thank you all so much for coming. We hope that you come back to our next Score Plus Teach session with Mary and I on December 18th. And we also hope to see you tomorrow morning at Dr. Hatton's session on comprehension and knowledge, or pass that along to your school administrator if you liked what we did today and you want to share the series with them as well. Thank you all so much, and you get your CEUs by completing the survey. So once you've completed the survey, you'll have a link to CEUs. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.